Take a look at this mockup and now at this one. The only thing that has changed are shadows, and to be exact, we've changed boring gray shadows to superior colorful shadows. And this is exactly the topic for our today's design session: how to create colorful shadows and how to use them to get your UI from good to great. Let's start with this dashboard design that I've shown you in the intro. Of course, right now we have no shadows here. We just have cards and the background, and we barely can see the cards because the background is really light. So we definitely need to add some shadows or borders to make them stand out more. With gray shadows, it is acceptable, of course, and the elements already pop out more, but you can tell that the gray background that we have, this bluish gray background, becomes a little bit muddy, especially in those places that are around shadows. It looks like it's blue or grayish. It doesn't really pop. The color doesn't really pop. Usually what I prefer to do is to work with colorful shadows. So let's duplicate the dashboard here. And let's change the shadows to colorful shadows. I need to select all of the cards again, and we can go in two directions. We can either use the accent color that is like purple here, or we can use the background color, which is a little bit more bluish. I think that if we were to use the background color, it would be a little bit better. So let's try to do it. And now the shadow is of course the same color as the background color. We need to change it slightly. So what I like to do is to go all the way to the right so that we have an intense version of the background color, let's say, and lower down opacity to 10%. Let's deselect and let's see how it looks like. And in my opinion, it looks way better. Let's also add it to the navigation. And I think we also have those buttons here. So let's add the effect to them as well. 10% and blur of, let's say, 15 and 0 for y-axis. Let's hide the panels and take a look. I think that this UI looks modern and polished in comparison to the gray shadows that look a little outdated and not that sleek. This one is way better. When it comes to choosing colors for the shadows, I usually recommend going with something blue or purple. Those colors usually work the best, even if you have, let's say, the accent color like this orange one. And if you were to use it for the shadows, this wouldn't really work that well, even if we lower opacity to like 20. So for reds, oranges, pinks, it's usually better to go with something from the opposite side of the spectrum or just something bluish, purplish, etc. And there is one more trick that I would like to show you. So after adding a shadow, no matter if it's gray or colorful, sometimes the edges become a little bit blurry. They are not blurry, of course, when you look at pixels, but when you look at the interface from the distance, sometimes it feels like it. So when you have this kind of impression, you can add a border to the cards. Let's select one of our cards. Let's add a stroke here. And of course, we would like something from the blue color palette, not as intense because it looks very active, but we can make it very, very light. So when you compare the card on the right with the card on the left, you can tell that this one definitely pops a little bit more. So it depends on the interface that you have. It may be an overkill for an intense interface like this, but it's also an option. Now let's imagine that this is a part of the website that you're designing, the carousel of testimonials. And now we have the same background that we had for our dashboard and also a white card. And we need to make it pop a little bit more because it feels a little flat. What we can do is to add a regular shadow, which is like a black shadow with 10% opacity, let's say blur of 15 and 0 for y-axis, and do the same for arrows because they are also quite flat. So let's go with 15 as well and 0. And we have a pretty decent component that just stands out a little bit more from the background. To make it a little bit better, what we can do is to change the color of the drop shadow and for the arrows as well. Paste the color. And now you can see that the element still stands out, but it's a little bit more in brand and more harmonized with the background. But honestly, it still feels a little bit boring. What we can do to make it more visually attractive is to increase the opacity to 30 and blur, let's say, to 40. And now our element is sort of glowing, this kind of glow effect that is really useful, especially for light themes, because glow is usually something that you're expecting from the dark themes. It's like futuristic, modern type of UI. Here with this effect, you can do it even for light themed websites. And there's one more thing that I would like to show you that we can do to this card. So let's copy the interface. And I would like to change the shadows and add an internal shadow, so the inner shadow. Let's change the first drop shadow to something really small, like 2% blur and maybe 10% opacity. Let's copy the same color and let's close the panel here. And for the second shadow that we've added, let's select inner shadow. And right now you can see that the shadow was added to the top edge and it looks a little bit like it's concave. Let's change that slightly. So let's paste our value here. Let's go with something like 30%, 20% blur, and 0 for Y. It's a little dark. Let's go maybe with 25. I would like to add the same effect also for our logo here. So I would like to add the inner shadow, the same color, let's say 20% opacity, blur 20 as well. Maybe let's go to 10 and the y-axis for 0. And we can also add it for the arrows so it all looks good together. Inner shadow, change opacity, maybe change blur to like 10, something like this. So they all look like they are from the same family, let's say. And this effect here, it looks a little bit like new morphism, this trend that was really popular some time ago. So you will probably not use it very often, but at least you know how to do it now, and maybe you will use it in the future for something. An important thing here is that you add the drop shadow, just a slight one that we've added at the very beginning. So let me zoom in and show you how it looks like without it and with it. There is a very subtle difference, but when you look at the whole item, it really makes a bigger difference here. If you've been enjoying this video so far, you can subscribe to my channel. I publish new videos about UX design, sketching interfaces, and working in Figma every week. The next example that I prepared for you is this hero section of a website in dark theme, and it is for a product that generates designs automatically and it uses AI, so it's a little bit futuristic. You can see that we already have the border here and the colors look a little bit futuristic, they look like they glow, and there are also those 3 ellipses that they look a little bit cosmic and futuristic as well. It looks okay, but it looks like it's missing something. So let's try to add a shadow to our search element. Let's go to effects, we have drop shadow, let's paste this purple color. Let's leave 25 as it is, let's go with a bigger blur, so something like 40, so we have this a little bit of a glow. And for y-axis, let's go with 2. Let's zoom in and see how it looks like. I think we can even increase the opacity slightly, maybe to 35. And right now you can see that there is this glow behind the search bar, which makes it look a little bit more futuristic as well. And we can also try to select all of the ellipses here. They seem to be really subtle, but what I would like to do is to add effect as well. Go with the same purple color. I think around 60% opacity because the element is really small, and like 40% blur. And now when you look at the ellipses, it is very subtle. The effect is very subtle, but it still gives a little bit of a pop to the background. And I think you're ready with this one. Take a look at how just adding this simple glow effect to the search bar just changed the whole design. Now let's come back to our dashboard, but in dark mode, and try to apply shadows to the dark mode with more condensed interface, so a product interface instead of a website interface. Let's bring back our panels and let's select all of the cars that we have here. And let's try to apply effect drop shadow, let's say even 100%, just to make it really pronounced, 20% blur, and 0 for y-axis, so something comparable that we've applied previously. And of course, the cards are popping a little bit, but let's see how it would look like with the reversed effect. So let's go with, let's say, a white shadow. And of course, like 10% opacity probably would be max, or maybe even lower. And we have this glow effect, very similar to what we did on the website, but unfortunately for products like this one, probably the darker shadow would be a better choice, or just no shadow, because the glow effect like this may be on hover, but overall, like this would be really overwhelming for all the cards. A fun alternative to it is to apply the inner shadow instead of a drop shadow. So if you were to change for inner shadow, like this, we have this subtle glow. It doesn't really look like this new morphism effect because of the dark theme, so it's really different, but at the same time we see the glow at the edges and it feels a little more 3D. So probably when it comes to dark themes, we would go no shadows, darker shadows, or maybe this inner glow like here, just to give the interface a little bit of life. Another interesting use for colorful shadows is the focus state. So when you're using the keyboard navigation on websites and in the applications, you can see this rectangle here is moving from one element to another. This is a focus state. It means that we can, for example, enter this menu right now. As you can see, Asana has this pretty standard focus state, this blue frame. And let me show you how to create this state for the outline button that we have here. So let's copy the outline button. And now we need to apply effects and drop shadow. And let's open the menu. Let's select the color that we want to have and the 50% opacity. I would like y-axis to be 0 and blur also to be 0. And I would like to add spread here because I would like the shadow to spread but not be blurry. And right now it is blocked because I need to, first of all, add fill to my button. And now it will activate the spread, and let's say that I want to go with 4. And this is exactly the effect that we wanted to achieve. And actually, this is how this effect will be also implemented in CSS by developers, so it aligns perfectly for the design system. Another effect that we can achieve with shadows with no blur is a brutalistic effect shadow. So let's select our bland card with no shadow at all. Let's add effect, drop shadow, and now let's go with 0% blur and y-axis of 4 and x-axis of 4 as well. And let's say that we want to have like 100% opacity here. Usually for those kind of cards and those kind of effects, maybe you have seen like larger values here, and maybe even people were adding a stroke just to finish this design and make it really, really heavy. But this style will probably not come very useful for you because it's very heavy, and also this trend is sort of going away. So let's try to modernize it and let's try to reuse the card so that we can make it a little bit lighter. Let's remove the stroke for this one. And let's change the shadow color to just a light blue. And let's go with 4 and 4 for X and Y. And here you can see that this shadow is very delicate. It is still cartoonish, and with some brands it will work very well. But because of color that we've changed, it doesn't really come across as that heavy brutalistic shadow anymore. Of course, we could make it a little bit heavier. So let's go with, let's say 10X and 10Y. And let's add stroke to the card as well with the same color, and let's say 3 pixels. So this third card is of course heavier than the middle one. It's closer with styles to this black one at the beginning, but because of use of this delicate color, it still doesn't come across as that heavy. Overall, you probably will find yourself using this type of shadow, if anything. And the last shadow for today that I would like to show you is the gradient shadow. By standard in Figma, you cannot really add the gradient shadow. For drop shadows, you can only use just solid colors. There is no gradient option here. But what we can do is to remove the drop shadow and to copy this card and draw a rectangle that is exactly the size of the card. So we would go with 421 and 425. And what we want to do is to add gradient to this rectangle. I would like a diagonal gradient like this. And for the color on the left, I will just sample the background color for the picture here, the pink. For the one on the right, I'll add yellow. It will be very nice here, also in 100% opacity. And I want the middle color to be a little more peachy, let's say, so that the gradient is a little bit darker here in the middle. I would like to align this gradient with the card and send it to back so that we don't see it anymore. And now with the rectangle selected, I would like to go to effects and add layer blur. And now increase it to something like 100. And there will be this glow effect with the gradient for our background. And when we select this rectangle, we can still manipulate our gradient. So you can make changes to it. You can change the color or make it more or less intense. You can even change the opacity if the colors are too intense for you. Everything is editable. And you can even expand the size of this rectangle if you want more intensity on the edges here. And of course, you will probably not find yourself using this effect for the UIs of complex products or dashboards, for example, like we saw previously in the video, but maybe for some websites or presentations, it will come in handy. And I think it's good to know this workaround in Figma. Thank you for joining me today to explore the colorful shadows. Let me know in the comments if you've added them to your designs and what was the impact. Here I've selected some other videos that you might like. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you over in the next one.